Hi, I'm Lou Scott, and this is the Geppetto Room, where you don't have to be creative to be creative. You just have to be you, because here we're going to explain and explore methods, techniques to help you make better decisions, transformative decisions. Decisions that will enrich the way you live, the way you work, and the way you play in our state. Now today, before I introduce my guest, I want to read you something that's relevant to my guest. Let me read this. Dylan Thomas, a poet, wrote, "Do not go gentle into the good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the night." Now, there are many interpretations of that. Obviously, probably the first one might be that he was talking to the men in the trenches in World War I. Why it's relevant today to Bill Schubart, my guest, and so forth, relevant is because when I asked Bill to send me some stuff that I can use in the introduction, okay, he sent it to me, and this statement was on the bottom of his vitae. And after I read the vitae, which I'll read to you now, I decided, I saw what kind of man he was. He was transformative. He reached meaning in his life by making decisions, by following the trails that were not easy. But he looked at obstacles and problems in a transformative way. He never forgot. He never forgot that he's here. The meaning comes from helping people. And he never reached back, and he still does that today. A truly transformative individual, traveling roads with obstacles, treating those obstacles in transformative way. And that's what he's going to talk about today. And I found that interesting. Now, look at the energy. Let me read some of the things and the accomplishments of a meaningful life lived that way by Bill. Bill has written 3 collections of short stories, 5 novels, and a novelette. And he is a contributor, a monthly contributor to Vermont Digger. He's a founder of several very successful companies, bought and sold, very successful businessman also. And he has chaired, now he's devoted much part of his life to nonprofits. And he's chaired the following: the Vermont Arts Council, the Fletcher Allen Healthcare, Vermont Public Radio, Vermont Journalism Trust, and lately, the Vermont College of Fine Arts. Quite a background. All this while still continuing to write and still continuing to communicate and help other people. One of the things that struck me that I think is very important about him, he still counsels and has conversations with a virtual who's who of VIPs in Vermont. Right? He knows these people, he talks to them, he counsels. Today, this transformative man is going to discuss something that he believes. He believes that political solutions, or any kind of solution to decision, is a complex system requiring a particular approach, an approach that's similar to reverse engineering. Interesting. So he's going to discuss that approach, the principles of those approach in general, and then he's going to discuss a particular problem that the state is having, which is the high cost of healthcare. That's what we're going to discuss. So stick around, and I think you're going to be amazed by this. Now, without further ado, let's introduce Bill Schubart. Bill, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Lou, and grateful to be at 79 years old. But I'm good, and I have no complaints. Oh, actually I have.
You have a complaint?
I have lots of complaints, but we won't put them on.
But you always solve those complaints in a transformative way.
I'm honored to be here today, and just really looking forward to this conversation. The issue of reverse engineering is really intriguing to me, and I learned it from a friend who actually travels all over the world counseling governments on complex systems. He lives here in Vermont. I've known him for years, and he primarily worked in telecommunications, but now he talks about reverse engineering. And what is so appealing to me about it is when we look at any complex system, be it the environment, housing, healthcare, public education, criminal justice, name any one of them.
So those policy decisions you can apply reverse engineering. Reverse engineering, people understand, well, it's just machines. They break
Yes.
down machines.
Yeah.
But you're applying them to policy decisions.
Well, yes, and one of the major problems is that when a group is put together and say, okay, we got to solve the problem of public education. They have a big roundtable discussion, and everybody says, here's what doesn't work, here's what's wrong, here's what's broken, and they go around and they talk about all the things that don't work. That immediately puts people on the defensive.
Everybody.
Because everybody is looking at where am I going to be when this discussion's over? Whereas in reverse engineering, if you say, look, this complex system, let's take healthcare, has some real serious challenges. There are some real problems in it. We all know that, we feel that. We need to take a look at we need to envision together, what would an ideal healthcare system look like? Forget about all the stuff that's broken. Forget about doesn't work. We'll come back to that. But let's start out working together, listening to one another, talking to one another, and agree on a vision for what an ideal system would look like.
So I would call that brainstorming. So you're brainstorming and you're allowing every idea is right at the.
Every idea is fine.
Let's not set up right and wrong. There is no wrong idea.
Right.
Let's get
get
it all on the table.
You get all the ideas out on the table. The challenge, Lou, becomes you have to then derive consensus. You have to go over all the ideas with everybody. Eventually, you have to get to a place where you can actually articulate on one page what an ideal healthcare system would look like in the state of Vermont.
Which would be a transformative page.
Which would be a transformative page. Then you have a goal, a vision that you refer to. Then the next stage is, how do we get there? But the next stage, which is really critical, is whoever is leading this discussion, and there has to be a leader. It can't be just a free-form, anybody talk. There has to be some, recognizable architecture that takes the direction to the vision. And that person has to be mindful of the people who are worried about losing their privilege as you move to the ideal. In other words, if somebody says, well, but I do this in the current system, and I don't see that in the future system. They
feel threatened.
They feel threatened. So what you need to do is to bring everybody along and say, look, hold it. There's going to be a place for everybody in this system. And there's going to be a process to help you move from where you are today to your place in this vision. You've been critical all through up to now, and you're going to be critical going forward. So you need to remove that threat, because so often what happens is the legislature will put together a commission. They'll say, we've got to study public education, housing, whatever. Everybody talks about what's wrong, and then, as I said, people go on the defensive. And then they organize, and then they descend on the legislature and say, no, this isn't right, this doesn't work.
And all their opinions and negativity is colored by a lot of biases.
Yeah.
The fear of unknowns,
right.
all the human factors that come into making decisions.
Absolutely.
So the moderator has to be pretty astute.
The moderator has to be aware of that, attuned to it, and help people always come back to the vision and say, no, you have a place in this, and we're going to help you get there.
So everybody feels confident.
You take the threat out. And then, let's talk about health care for a second. I think at least everyone I talk to, including people in the hospital systems, realize that it's broken. Yeah. And I think for years. And if you want to look into the stratosphere, we have to ask ourselves why, of 130 countries in the world that believe that healthcare is a human right and have different ways of achieving it, but they believe in that, why is the United States that is the only one of civilized country that doesn't believe that believes it's a business?
A big business.
A big business, yeah. It's, in Vermont, it's 20% of the GDP in Vermont and is responsible for 19% of employment in Vermont. That's a huge business.
Right.
And, we spend, I think it's $4.25 trillion on healthcare nationally.
And that's a business that's going to be defended highly. defended by all the components, all the individuals.
When you look at how much the pharmaceutical
complex.
industry, when you look at how much the pharmaceutical industry spends lobbying the Congress of the United States, last year it was some $730 million. That's to ensure that their profit is not put at risk. And you want to ask yourself a tough question? How is it that one industry can get Congress to pass a law that says you can't negotiate volume discounts for Medicare and Medicaid, the two largest consumers? They got Congress to pass that law.
How?
Now think about that.
By the weight of their lobbying, by the weight of their money, by who knows?
Who knows? I mean, you spend $730 million. There's a lot of time in Hawaii, but whatever. Again, back to the issue. If I were moderating a discussion on the future of healthcare and using this form of reverse engineering, the first thing I would do would be to ask the people of Vermont, what's your experience? What do you think? I'd go out, I would organize listening sessions, and
What do they think the system should be?
What works and what doesn't work? Let them talk about that, and then ask them, again, what would your vision of an ideal system be? Then you go to some community leaders. Then you come back to your group after gathering this information and you work to develop consensus on the vision. Then you articulate the vision. Then you share the vision.
What happens, what I think about government, when they have meetings and so input meetings, you bring in somebody, many times they're not prepared. They don't understand the nuances of the problem, so they start to bitch. They start to talk about their own prejudice and so forth.
Okay.
So aren't you going to face that when you go out to the public?
But that's important. And the reason is, I mean, you don't communicate unless you have three channels. One channel is opinion or intellection or essay. It's, rationale. The other channel is story, personal stories. They matter.
You have to hear it.
You have to hear it. And the third is data. If you don't have all three of those channels on your set, you're not going to communicate effectively. So
say those three again.
okay, the first is like intellectual or essay or opinion. It's somebody writing an essay saying this is what's wrong, this is what we should do, whatever. The second is personal story.
Their experience.
I had terrible pain. I went into the emergency room. This was my experience.
The anecdotes.
The anecdotes. That's critical. And then the third thing is trustable data. And I say trustable because anyone in business knows that somebody can say, bring me the data necessary to support this conclusion. Doesn't work that way. And that's happening in a huge way in the medical industry. And that, in fact, is one of the major things going on now between the hospitals and the regulators. Wait a sec, where did you get this data? Where did this data come from?
They attack the data.
Yeah, on both sides.
They attacked it.
And it is possible to create definable, clear, functional data, but you have to have the source and you have to have the definitions correct. And that's where it gets muddy. Anyway, I don't want to digress into that. And the reason I say you have to engage the public is because right now, one of the biggest problems we have in healthcare is the fact that it's concentrated in urban areas. UVM Medical Center draws on, a huge area. And UVM Health Network draws on an even larger area, including upstate New York. And, it's the most expensive healthcare occurs in the emergency room. And if you don't have anything local, that's where people go. So if you were to imagine an ideal system, what you would do is you'd look at all the types of providers. You'd talk about the single doctor, the small practice, the community clinic, the federally qualified healthcare center, which is a specific definition that Senator Sanders was very helpful in putting together. And then you'd look at the critical access hospitals, which are the smaller hospitals. Then you'd look at the tertiary care hospitals like Dartmouth and UVM.
Aren't all those units, all those delivery specters
right.
are driven by a philosophy that's more curative rather than preventative.
Well, that's the
Is that
other.
true?
That's the other issue. I mean, we have a law in Vermont that you cannot get what is called a certificate of need. Think of it as a driver's license to have a hospital in Vermont unless it's nonprofit. Nonprofit, I'm sorry, and it drives people crazy when I say this. Nonprofit is driven by mission, not profit. Do they have to make profits? Yes, because they have to make investments. And the correct term is retained earnings. But it's the same thing. But they have to be driven first by mission. And the board of directors, which is a huge weakness in hospitals in Vermont.
Weakness?
Weakness.
The choice?
Boards
Why?
don't understand. Boards don't understand what their obligations are, and it's not horrendously complex. Being on the board of a hospital is often like, oh, you know, I can check this off on my CV, but it comes with huge legal responsibilities. A good example is when a hospital fails or a college fails, everybody goes, oh, that president, oh, no wonder the place went down. What a president. You know what? I'm sorry, it's not the president. It's the board legally. The board hires, fires, judges the performance of, and compensates the leader. And if the leader's not doing their job and fails, and the board hasn't acted, the board has legal responsibility. And too many boards of hospitals and colleges don't fully understand that.
They don't fully understand it.
Pardon?
They don't fully understand
They don't fully understand it. And the other
it. Does
issue...
it bias their decisions?
It's not so much bias, it's just that they don't fully understand the job description. And you know, the other piece of it is nonprofits do not compete, they collaborate. Businesses compete, and that's healthy. In the nonprofit sector, you collaborate. You don't say, we want to do all of the joint replacements in Vermont, or we're going to do all of dialysis.
Let me ask something. Does the collaboration drive the price up? Because they're talking to each other.
No, it drives it down.
They're setting
It drives it down.
collaboration does?
Yes, absolutely. It drives the price down. And there were people who would disagree with that. But if you had a vision that we talked about for healthcare in Vermont, you wouldn't have every single hospital investing in joint replacement or dialysis.
Yeah.
Or you would say, okay, regionally, we need 3 places in Vermont that do dialysis. So let's pick Bennington, Rutland, and Newport, or Copley, you know, or maybe it's 4, but again, that's part of the visioning process. And you would say, do we need every single hospital in Vermont doing joint replacement? No. We need 4 or 5, or 3, whatever
But
the
at
number
the
is.
same time, everybody gets greedy with their CON, with their certificate of needs. They want to do, so there's a lot of duplication.
That's the thing is, and you know, it costs a fortune to put together the team and the technology to do some of these specialties.
Yeah.
UVM just invested in what's called CAR-T cell technology. It's the most advanced cancer technology now.
Right.
Shows huge promise, isn't fully proven yet, but is getting there quickly. You come into the hospital, first of all, you have to hire the technical people who can do it. They're all over $1 million. Second of all, you have to put together the technology. I don't know how much that costs. The third thing is, the single pill you take to start that is $420,000 for one pill.
It's nonsense.
Okay, so if that's done at Mass General routinely and done at Sloan Kettering routinely, do we really need it in Burlington? Especially if you're only going to do 4 or 5 a year?
What drives a hospital for a certificate of need, to duplicate something that's highly duplicated and expensive?
Competition.
But they're a nonprofit, supposed to be
competition.
no competition.
Tell them that.
They should be cooperating as opposed
I mean,
to
this is, frankly, there's a really fascinating dynamic going on between the Green Mountain Care Board, which is the legal regulator of hospitals and their budgets, and the hospital system. And it's especially notable at this point in time between UVM Health Network and UVM Medical Center. The recommendation from the Green Mountain Care Board was that they keep their rate request increases to 8%. But when I was chair of Fletcher Allen, I had several board members who were saying to me, Bill, do you realize we're spending $500,000 providing all this data requested by BSCA, which was then the regulator, like Green Mountain Care Board is today, was then the regulator. So I let the conversation go on. Everybody had their say. And then I said, okay, my turn now. I just want to remind you, our former president is serving a 2-year term in jail. They view us as criminals. So when they ask for things,
You better give it to them.
we're going to provide them. You know, when a policeman stops you on Route 7 for speeding, do you say, I'd like to see your license to the policeman?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, anyway, it's a fascinating time. It's a time of immense change in the regulatory.
Today is immense change
Immense
in the
change.
regulatory.
Yeah, and
What's
I think
the
a really
change?
positive
Are they getting
one.
smarter? Are they getting, this is not working?
No, I think that unlike the Green Mountain Care Board, when it was under Mr. Mullins, who was from Rutland, where the rate increases were generally pretty just agreed upon, and the cost was just skyrocketing. The Green Mountain Care Board, under its new leadership and new members, is looking at their role very differently, which is from the prospect of population health. Population health is not just about quality. It's about quality, access, and cost. How many people do you know have tried to get an appointment at UVM Medical Center and had to wait 2 or 3 months?
Right.
How many people do you know have gone to the emergency room and waited a couple of days?
During that situation, because of that situation, why was the cost skyrocketing? No controls?
Competition. We're going to do this. We're going to be all things to all people. And I gotta come back to
They're
make
competing for people. They're competing for patients.
yes, which
Even
is
though
revenue.
they're nonprofit.
Which is revenue.
They need the revenue to build more buildings and more. That's a mindset.
It is an absolute mindset, and unfortunately, it's not a nonprofit mindset, and that's really difficult. I mean, primary care belongs in the communities, and I would argue it belongs in our public schools. Trauma-informed counseling should be an integral part of every teacher's capacity. It's critical.
If we began to teach kids about healthcare, about their own bodies in true sense, the time they got to adults, they would call on the system less because
Yes.
they'd be more astute. The doctors go crazy when they hear that because, well, they become their own doctor. No, they become sensitive to their bodies.
Right.
They don't rely on the system so
Right.
much.
Or social pressure, or what they see on YouTube, you know, or Instagram. I mean, we have got to move our investments, excuse me, in healthcare upstream to primary care. We have to integrate it into our school systems. We need, when somebody feels non-specific pain, we don't want them to get into a car and drive to the emergency room in Burlington where they might wait hours before they're seen. We want them to go to their local clinic where a primary care doctor will listen to them, give them the time they need, not just like this, and say, you know, tell me where the pain is.
I have to ask you right now that hopefully we could do this again because it's a very complex system. But if you had to summarize the application of reverse engineering on decision making, summarize it for me.
Bring all the affected people together in different groups, the populace, community leaders, and then the people, your think tank. Make sure everybody is heard about what is the vision for an ideal system. Then you derive consensus, and then you articulate it, and then you use that as your goalpost as you move forward.
Now that's possible even under the duress of the contemporary, of what's going on right now, currently. For example, you're going to use that methodology right now. The review board is considering the pricing now, all the increases of the hospital. And some of those increases I think are pretty high and stuff like that. Yeah. What is the review board? Does the review board have the time to do this system, to make this decision? Or just going to give it to them?
No, it's a very fair question. I mean, there are two things going on. One is the system. we're losing access and we're losing our ability to afford it. Although the quality remains high. We're very lucky. We have good health care in Vermont if we can afford it or if we can access it, meaning get an appointment. So we have to look at the other two things that are broken and try and preserve as much of the quality as we can too. But everybody can't be pitching quality. If you want this, you go to Rutland. You want this, you go to Bennington. You want this, you go to Burlington.
So to specialize as opposed to being a generalist is a very difficult proposition when you present to the medical industry.
But one of the last things I would say is I think that if I say anything that's really important on this show today, primary care belongs in the community, not in the emergency room. We have to expand the number. We're going to be short 40,000 primary care doctors in this country next year. We need primary care doctors in our communities, in small clinics, helping people.
Doing the initial medicine and then passing it up. Actually, there's a concept like that years ago in China called the street doctors, who would see people. Interesting idea.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me conclude. One, I'm going to get Bill back to talk about healthcare and some other issues because it's interesting. So many approaches of reverse engineering. Think about them. Maybe do some research on your own, how you could apply those techniques and principles to your own decisions. And if you're a leader, certainly apply them to the groups that you're leading. We have to do things in a transformative way. Standard, common, routine is not going to help state of Vermont. We have to be transformative. We have to take those roads that are less traveled. We have to unload ourselves of all our biases. That's what you should take away from this, and take away the idea that we're going to bring Bill back. With that, I'm Lou Scott, and this is the Geppetto Room, where you don't have to be creative to be creative. You just have to be you. Until next time.